Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. Lucasfilm just announced that they basically rebooted their original plans for Star Wars Episode 10, 11, and 12, the next saga of the Star Wars trilogy, like the main thrust of where Star Wars is going in the next 10 years. There are a couple conflicting reports from different trades in Hollywood whether or not they're a continuation of the Skywalker Saga of some kind that we've had with the prequel movies, the original trilogy, or when you dig a little deeper, there are more sources inside Lucasfilm that say that this is not connected to the previous Skywalker Saga movies and it's a completely new direction for Star Wars. But all of them are reporting that the new trilogy will mostly feature new characters that have not been featured in the movies up to this point, and it's basically Star Wars trying to reset itself going forward, instead of trying to rehash a lot of the characters that have come before, particularly the sequel trilogy characters. We probably will see a couple returning older characters like Grogu, for instance, show up just because he's built into the Star Wars universe as living up to 900 years like Yoda, so he's going to be around no matter what that far into the future. It will take place after the events of the sequel trilogy. It's mostly a question of how far in the future it's going to be set, because it won't just be a simple sequel to the sequel trilogy, like it'll be its own separate thing with completely new ideas going forward. But this is a pretty big deal because they've temporarily canceled that Rey movie, meaning they're not using it as the basis for the next sequel trilogy. I think there was some confusion about that. They're not turning the Rey movie into a new trilogy. They basically took that off the board because it's not going to be the basis for the new trilogy going forward, which is why they have to rehash pretty much everything they were going to do in that movie too. Those of you that have wanted them to retcon the sequel trilogy will probably be a little bit happy about this. They're not going to actually retcon the sequel trilogy, but this is as close as you're going to get to that. More of like a soft reboot on all their creative behind the scenes going forward in like the really, really big movies. Probably one of the smartest things that Star Wars could have done, just because it was so divisive the last several years of Star Wars in the movies. How do you fix Star Wars? It seems like it's on fire behind the scenes. Well, you just give it a big, fresh start with completely brand new characters and ideas, with like a couple of the most popular things right now, which include Grogu. So we'll break it all down and just the general state of all the other movies that they have not canceled yet, just because that's kind of the Star Wars thing right now, announcing a whole bunch of movies that they cancel right after it, and what these new rebooted plans for the future of Star Wars are actually going to look like. So if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes. There's also Skeleton Crew coming up in December. I will be doing episode videos for that, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of those. That'll be connected to all the Mandalorian stuff in that part of the timeline, which is basically filling the gap in Star Wars movies right now for like the next several years, giving them enough time to actually figure out and write this next Star Wars trilogy, episode 10, 11, and 12. But if you didn't see the news yesterday, according to Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, Variety, Lucasfilm is intending the new trilogy, the new Saga movies, Episode 10, Episode 11, Episode 12, to not be a continuation of the sequel trilogy, Rise of Skywalker, basically. Everybody cheering in the background just because the sequel trilogy was such a mess. Couple great ideas that just did not work out, kind of pulled down by the lack of organization when they actually made those movies. But this new Saga trilogy will take place later in the timeline after the events of Rise of Skywalker. So if that wasn't clear, they are moving forward in the timeline, just long enough to explain why all the sequel trilogy characters aren't around, running around in the movies. When they say it'll mostly be fresh ideas, they're basically saying brand new characters that we haven't seen in Star Wars before, with like maybe a couple returning, which is why I mentioned the Grogu character, just because he's safe up to like 900 years later in the timeline. And you can definitely tell this is like breaking stuff, because as I was making this video, even more new context on what's going on with some of the characters in those movies is dropping. For instance, there's a rumor now that Rey will be like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of this new trilogy, more of a background character. They might kill her off at some point during the trilogy, bring her back as a Force ghost if she stays in all those movies in the background. But again, the takeaway from that is they canceled that Rey movie in favor of making her a smaller character as part of this new direction for Star Wars. So if there's any confusion about that, it's not like she's going to be a main character of the new trilogy. It's not going to be her new trilogy. Here's the other big part of this, somewhat controversial or not controversial. Simon Kinberg is developing it. You might remember him as the person who worked on most of the Fox Marvel movies, starting with the original Fantastic Four movie. He got his start there doing script revisions while they were still filming the original Fantastic Four. Then they gave him more creative producing duties by the time they got to the X-Men First Class reboot and all the X-Men movies after that. The only actual X-Men movie or like Marvel Fox movie that he actually directed was X-Men Dark Phoenix, which is kind of dubious, I know, just because that movie was also a bit of a mess. Originally, he left Fox when it was bought by Disney, and they canceled all their previous X-Men, Fantastic Four, Deadpool 3 plans because Kevin Feige started folding that stuff into the MCU. He developed a totally different version of Deadpool and Wolverine, and now Simon Kinberg is brought back by Disney to work on their new Star Wars Saga trilogy. According to Rob Liefeld, who was also posting reactions of his to this, Kinberg was the one at Fox who pushed them to make the first Deadpool movie when they still didn't want to make it after the test footage leaked. The way that Rob Liefeld talked about it, he made it sound like Kinberg is actually a pretty decent writer, so at least when he's plotting out this new Star Wars trilogy, as long as they bring in some really solid directors to actually do this, and they know what their plan is going into it, and they fix all those script issues before they start filming, we should actually be in business, because this, obviously, you remember, is not what they did when they made the original sequel trilogy, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Just a little while ago, you probably remember, Damon Lindelof had been hired to write the next trilogy with this big writer's room at Lucasfilm. It was more connected to the older Rey, New Jedi Order storyline. That was what this whole timeline they revealed at the last Star Wars Celebration was about, like the big saga of where all the different movies were going to be taking place the next 10 years. At the time, there were like 9 or 10 different Star Wars movies that were in development, then a whole bunch of them got canceled, and they just revealed that they've completely rebooted their plans for the future of Star Wars. The original version of Episode 10 was going to take place between 10 and 20 years later in the timeline. Episode 10 changed significantly while Damon Lindelof and his creative team were writing it. It started further forward in the timeline with a really old woman version of Rey, like old man Luke Skywalker kind of vibes. They never actually revealed who those new villains were going to be, only that they were going to be a totally different threat. Then Lucasfilm had them change the movie to a younger Rey, and it was set 10 years after Rise of Skywalker because Daisy Ridley wanted to come back and do more movies. Then Damon Lindelof got fired from the movie, or he left of his own accord, depending on who you believe, and Stephen DeKnight, who did Daredevil Season 2, Peaky Blinders, he's done a bunch of other genre movies, was hired to take over that Rey movie. Cut to a year later, he just quit that movie, or he also got fired, depending on the way you look at it. Lucasfilm also announced that the Rey version of Episode 10 was indefinitely shelved, all because now it sounds like that is no longer gonna be Star Wars Episode 10, and they're completely rebooting those plans with this fresh start, brand new characters that we've never seen before with Simon Kinberg's version of this upcoming trilogy. So it's basically Lucasfilm wanting to wipe the slate clean of the sequel trilogy without totally retconning it out of the current Star Wars canon. So that's why you probably hear people talking about the new Saga movies being a completely new saga and not being the Skywalker Saga continued. Basically, Lucasfilm giving Star Wars a mulligan, like a brand new idea for the future of Star Wars, totally new path. Personally, I think this is the smartest thing Star Wars could have done for like the future of Star Wars without doing a traditional reboot on everything and decanonizing the entire Disney era of Star Wars. They're not going to go that far. Remember what Dave Filoni has done with the Legends canon the past 10, 15 years. Let's slowly bring all that stuff back through the Clone Wars and all the modern Mandalorian stuff too. One of the other big parts of this, too, the other major changes that they recently made at Star Wars to fix some of the earlier issues they had during the sequel trilogy was promoting Dave Filoni, giving him almost total creative control over everything Star Wars. Like, he's not exactly the Kevin Feige of Star Wars, but he's really close to being like that. What happened when they started making Star Wars The Force Awakens in the sequel movies is that J.J. Abrams was hired and they let him do pretty much anything that he wanted with no real creative oversight, and he made The Force Awakens without having any idea what the story for Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker were going to be. In fact, originally, he wasn't even planning to direct or work on any more Star Wars movies after The Force Awakens. Lucasfilm begged him to come back at the last minute at the 10th hour after they fired Colin Trevorrow and needed to get Rise of Skywalker out in a super short amount of time. Not enough time to actually iron out all the wrinkles, as you can see. Like we saw, it was a complete mess. So that's why everything felt like such a self-own on Star Wars part with the sequel trilogy. Dave Filoni being in charge now is meant to prevent that from ever happening again, so that when they start filming, they start rolling cameras on Star Wars Episode 10, they have a pretty good idea of how Episode 11 and Episode 12 are going to play out, with like minor adjustments that they make along the way, not them completely figuring everything out on the fly. So because they just announced this publicly right now, it means they probably decided to do this a while ago and then just sat on the news waiting to announce it. That's probably why they decided to turn The Mandalorian Season 4 into a movie right now and call it The Mandalorian and Grogu, releasing in 2026. Jon Favreau basically wrote all of Mando Season 4, then Lucasfilm came along knowing that they were going to cancel their short-term movie plans that they'd announced, like the Rey movie, for example, which was originally supposed to be their next theatrical movie. And told Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau they needed to stall for time because they wanted to put Star Wars back in theaters, like turn it back into a theatrical event, not so much a TV event like it's been since The Rise of Skywalker. And they needed a movie to do that. And the most popular, most viable option they had was to take their most popular current property, which is basically The Mandalorian, and put that in movie theaters. So Jon Favreau took all of his Mandalorian Season 4 episodes and just turned it into that movie, which they finished filming a little while ago. So the idea now is it's going to take them at least 3 to 4 years to actually bang out the next sequel trilogy, Episode 10, Episode 11, Episode 12, and they need something to fill the void. That's what all the Mandalorian era movies are doing right now. Ahsoka Season 2, for example, that's still going to be a TV show, but like you have the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, you have the Thrawn movie that they're still planning on doing, which might just turn into a Mandalorian and Grogu sequel. Sounds kind of like it will, and they might do a trilogy of movies in the Mandalorian era if everything goes well. For example, though, there are a lot of really big theatrical things that they can do right now in the Mandalorian part of the timeline. For example, probably one of the craziest things that they're setting up during Ahsoka Season 1 right now that they can pay off in those movies is turning Anakin into a Force god. If you didn't watch my Ahsoka Season 1 episodes, they're basically setting up the idea that he's going to replace the Mortis gods. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below. Do you like this Star Wars is basically giving itself a mulligan, rebooting the future of the franchise without retconning all the stuff that's come before? It's basically them trying to get rid of all the baggage that comes with trying to do a movie follow-up to the sequel trilogy. Like, you know what, let's just put some of the stuff that didn't work in a drawer and never talk about it again. We'll probably hear a little bit more about what's happening with the Mandalorian and Grogu movie pretty soon. I expect them to release an official shiny HD version of the trailer pretty soon. I've already done a video for the trailer that they did release. You can click here for that, and click here for all those Marvel 2025 trailers too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.